Big Ben Bong. Never said that before.
Also, I've never realised how onomatopoeic bong is, but it was really a bong, wasn't it?
It's a big old bong, yes. And we heard it at 7 o'clock, 7 bongs, then 8, 9, and then I think I went just after the 9 bongs.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. Today, I'm joined by friend of the show, Roger Atkins, who you may know as the bloke from LinkedIn, but we know as the beacon of all goings-on in the battery world, and also a donor of a fantastic set of cowboy hats.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking of calling myself, rebranding myself Electric Cowboy, but then I thought that might involve then getting the shirt, the chaps, the boots, the spurs, and who knows, maybe even a horse. So I'm not doing that.
Stick with your ID buzz for now. And today we're going to be delving into the world of the Geneva Motor Show.
Oh, yes.
Some battery bits and bobs and some other things that are going on in our general spheres. But before we do, a couple of points of admin. First of all, I am not Robert Llewellyn. I've been filling his... very
now
large...
you tell me. I've been brought here under false pretenses.
Total false pretenses. But I'm standing in for him today. I hope I am a worthy substitute. For those who don't know, my name's Imogen. I spend most of my time hanging out on the Everything Electric Show and the Fully Charged Show. We have loads of really, really fabulous episodes, so do make sure to check those out after listening to this lovely podcast. And one final piece of admin, I do need to tell you about our live shows at the Everything Electric live show. The next one is at the London Excel at the end of March, and we will be there, and so will some other fabulous speakers, loads of technology, loads of electric vehicles to try out, all the bits and bobs that you need for your own personal clean energy transition. Highly recommend you coming along. And we'll be there to chat to you, and it's always so wonderful to meet our lovely listeners and viewers of the show. So enough of that, all of the details are in the show description, and let's get into this podcast. So, it's always a treat seeing you. It's lovely to have you in my kitchen. Now, after we haven't seen each other for some time,
Oh no, it must be, hours?
Well, I was going to say, we did actually see each other yesterday.
Yes.
At the House of Commons. Do you want to tell the listeners what that was all about?
Well, first of all, I don't want to scare anybody with the prospect that I might actually be in the House of Commons literally as an MP or a minister or even, the Prime Minister. That moment's gone. It's not going to happen. But we were there with some very interesting people, with the Faraday Institute, with Innovate UK, with the Battery Industrialisation Centre, the BIC. It was those three organisations bringing people together to really just reflect on what's been achieved, what have they done, and where is the UK in regard to all of these things connected to electric vehicles. And obviously the battery is at the heart of that. There are also three presentations from lovely young companies, relative startups that are cracking on with what they're doing, full of passion, enthusiasm, ambition, etc. So yeah, it was an enjoyable evening, without a doubt. And we kept hearing Big Ben Bong a few times.
We did.
I had to say that slowly because Big Ben Bong. Never said that before.
Also, I've never realised how onomatopoeic bong is, but it was really a bong, wasn't it?
It's a big old bong, yes. And we heard it at 7 o'clock, 7 bongs, then 8, 9, and then I think I went just after the 9 bongs.
It was on the 9 bongs I thought, I really need to be getting home. Yeah. I desperately need a sandwich. But the thing was, so just for those who aren't aware, this was an event run by the Faraday Battery Challenge. And the Faraday Battery Challenge is the sort of public funding that's available for various different bits of the battery ecosystem within the UK. And what was remarkable to me, certainly, is I was like, oh, okay, so we've got the Faraday Battery Challenge, we've got Innovate UK, we've got UKRI, we've got the Automotive Transformation Fund, we've got the Faraday Battery Institute, the Faraday Battery Challenge, and then a couple of other acronyms as well. I was like, this is a tremendously complex landscape to navigate. And yet somehow, obviously, the startups that we heard from are navigating that landscape. But I feel, it was an enjoyable evening. Lovely to catch up with various people across the industry. But I felt it was missing something. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in a way it's a bit like many things, sort of in business for sure, and in life in general, in that you should look at what is the ultimate objective and kind of reverse engineer it from there. So for me, it was a bit like, what is this actually for? What's the purpose of this?
Yeah.
It's nice. It's interesting. You know, we're all there with hopefully vested in collective ambition in the things that we're talking about. But yeah, I felt perhaps it should have anchored itself in something as a specific objective, and then when they put it together, sort of reverse engineer it from that point. Because you can sometimes, when you list off all those different organisations, think, well, okay, good, they issue good reports, they make nice brochures, it feels good, but what actually is it achieving? What's the tangible benefit to the taxpayer? Because these are all funded by the government, by us, you and I, and all the other taxpayers. And yeah, you could slip into cynicism for saying, is it just a talking shop, or are they just all kind of going round and round and round? But then, funnily enough, driving over here this morning, I hadn't quite finished listening, excuse me, to the most recent podcast Rob had with Toddington Harper at GridServe.
Yeah.
And Toddington was reflecting on the journey the spectacular journey they're on in deploying all of these resources for charging, fast charging and otherwise. And by the way, that whole ambition, when you listen to it explained, is absolutely about bi-directional charging, because a lot of those resources they've got feed into the grid as well as charging up EVs. But the thing that stood out for me was when Toddington referenced Innovate UK as being one of the supporting funders, early days, of putting, for example, the first electric forecourt Braintree together. And in doing that then attracts private capital, Hitachi Capital, I think in that instance. So these things do have a benefit. That might not have happened if Innovate UK hadn't thrown their hat into the ring. And it's not just money, of course, it's also advice, guidance, and helping bring together some of those private, capital market players.
And I think, I need to apologise for sort of my scepticism, but it was interesting being there and thinking, well, yeah, of course, you need these funding bodies to kick off some of these projects and to ensure that the right PhDs get funded, that PhDs are connected with industries, that there is sort of this huge incubation of startups that we desperately need. But they also pointed out that they function as a bridge to connect to private capital, to help industrialise and commercialise and scale up and all those sorts of things. But it felt like in that room, some of those people weren't represented. And there did seem like this enormous missing piece of how do we go from research and have those other success stories like GridServe, where suddenly these things can be totally mainstream and really, really scaled up. And it sort of throws the question, well, what should the UK's leadership be in the world of batteries? And that was something that I certainly came away from feeling a little bit philosophical.
I don't think that's. I don't think you're being unkind or unfair in putting it in that regard, and not wishing to contradict some of the pretty eminent speakers that were there. I'm not going to list them off and name them, but this sense that the UK has had continuity in connecting up academia with the investing community and government over a period of time is just not the case. The government, this government, and I guess lots of governments, shilly-shally on all of this. There isn't that thread that runs through in terms of an industrial strategy that comes through even administrations within the same sort of government. 14 years of this particular government, you've had stop-start on many things to do with certainly renewable energy and the like, in regard to tariffs, in terms of all sorts of things that then, if you like, give a runway, give a foundation and a confidence to the capital markets to come in and make their money and then work closely with academia. So I think we've got, if you listed, say, three key components, we've got academia. We've got great academia. We truly have. It's spectacular. Without being too jingoistic, best in the world, arguably. We've got really interesting and innovative investors. We've got, I was with one recently, Laurence Segalin, who operates in the UK, runs a great podcast called Redefining Energy. another great podcast.
Oh,
Give another one a shout out.
I'm jotting a note because I need to add that to my
Definitely
list.
should, because that's very much orientated, of course it is, the name implies that, around energy, but infrastructure plays and all of those things. And I had lunch recently with Laurent to just get a sense of, well, how do investors see this? What is it that they want to understand? And that was quite enlightening. So yeah, I think we've got 2 out of 3. We've got a credible and an intelligent investing community. We've got a great academia, and within and in around that, entrepreneurs like Toddington, and there are plenty of others. But it just needs a bit more consistency from government.
Yeah, and there was something really lovely that Tony Harper, who heads up the Faraday Battery Challenge, that he said something along the lines of, he said it far more eloquently, that technology and climate doesn't march to the same drumbeat of election cycles.
Exactly.
And we need to couple those so that we can have a laser focused mission and vision, so that we can punch harder. No, wait, totally got that wrong. So we can punch smarter, not harder, and secure our position in the world as, UK battery leaders in some capacity.
Yes. And there is a way around this, because it's easy perhaps to, and I've said this, say it's democracy that's the problem. Not a closet communist, by the way, but in having these sort of changes of administration and direction gets in the way of long-term planning, particularly around things like energy. But if you can have cross-party support, bipartisan support, and there is evidence and illustration of that over time in different places around the world, different democracies. I think, and we might talk about him later on, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a very successful leader in California, the governor of California, in bringing together different parts of Republican and Democratic interest, in a way in which it kind of just worked better. So it can be done. So yeah, I think we just need to grow up a bit when it comes to how democracy works. But let's not get into the political. We'll bore people. Yeah.
We'll bore people, and I think I'm venturing into territory that, frankly, I know nothing about. So I think we should steer clear. But it was a beautiful event on the Thames.
Enjoyed it
in the House of Commons.
Yep.
Lovely experience. But the real reason that you're here, and the real reason that I want to chat to you, is about Geneva Motor Show, which is at the end of February, beginning of March, and you've got quite an important role there. What are you doing?
Yeah, I feel very flattered, very, very privileged actually, to be asked to look after 4 or 5 sessions in the afternoon of the 27th. They're calling that VIP day, but you can buy a ticket to it. It's not a big elitist thing. 26th is the press day with lots of press launches, etc. 27th then is VIP day. And in the afternoon of that day, Tuesday the 27th, we've got a number of very significant people, like, for example, Luca De Meo, CEO of Renault. And there's been some big news recently on Renault's electrification thrust. CEO of Pininfarina, somebody I can't mention yet, it's got to be confirmed, but 3 great people to start off with. And then a whole host of really interesting and what I'd like to say electric and eclectic speakers. So we've got a group from Formula E talking about how over 10 years that's really surprised a lot of people and become very successful and is doing all sorts of innovative things around motorsport. Chris Bangle, who's going to be on stage giving people a really interesting session on design, innovation, particularly in the context of electric vehicles. And then, oh my word, get ready for this. We're going to travel pole to pole with Chris and Julie Ramsey.
Oh, who, of course, we have met before. We saw them at the start of their journey. We went and saw them in Iceland where they were getting familiar with the car. So, okay, I have so many questions. Let's start with Luca De Meo, the big boss of Renault. And I think safe to say that Geneva's going to be a big show for Renault. They are launching the Renault 5.
Yes.
Which is going to be a €25,000 car. It's hugely exciting. It's on their new, smaller EV platform. I'm actually going to go and have a little look. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I think I'm allowed to say that.
Oh, you just did.
I did. It's in there. It's out in the public. But what are you hoping to speak with him about? What do you want to find out?
Well, it's very easy in this world to misinterpret things, and then for the discussion debate to be skewed by what people think is the case when it's something else. So take a case in point about recent news on their spin out, if you like, of the electrification side of the business.
Ampere,
Ampere, and for an IPO for that. And the decision is to not go ahead with that IPO. And that on the face of it can be misinterpreted in regards to the appetite for electrification, where we are, not just in Europe, but all around the world. But that was, I think, very nicely articulated and explained and presented during a press conference only the other evening, in fact, the night before last. And it's about how they can fund this ambition, because all electric ambition doesn't come cheap, from their own business. They don't need to go to the capital markets. They don't need to get an influx of billions from an IPO. And that's surely good news.
Yeah.
And within a business, that's always structurally a better place to be. When you're charting the course wholly from within. And some of what Luca spoke about in terms of, and I think he did literally use the word childish attitude of some people who from just a couple of years ago were all in on EV, are now saying, well, maybe we'll think about it a bit longer. Maybe we've gone a bit too soon, not getting into specifics on that. But there are some disappointing comments from some pretty serious people in and around the industry now. And a few of them, it has to be said, in the German auto industry that seems to be on the back foot a bit with a lot of this. So as to, what this all means, that's the kind of stuff I want to talk to Luca about. And by the way, PowerCo, the separate division of Volkswagen focused on building battery factories, they are supposedly going to spin that out, have an IPO for that. But when asked about that, they're now in two minds.
Yeah, I had read the same thing. And, it's very interesting when you read the sort of rhetoric around this, is that it's like, oh, well, EV sales are slowing down, so that's why they've made these decisions. And actually, Luca Di Meo has said that that's not why we've made that decision.
Correct.
At all.
Correct.
And I think just given how present they are at Geneva and how confident they are about their EV strategy, and not least how well supported they are in France as well, actually, it sort of speaks to the opposite of that.
Yeah, it does, Imogen. And I think, I'm British. I don't want to be jingoistic, but I also see myself as a European citizen of the world. We all are those things, I guess. Well, where you're from.
Hang on, I just got to say, remind me to tell you about University Challenge, because this was fantastic. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
What, you've been on University Challenge?
Oh no, I could never go on University Challenge. I would get one question in 40.
Well, I couldn't go on it because I never went to university. I know someone who did. I don't know if that counts. Yeah. I stood next to someone who went to university once. That was interesting. Yeah. Anyway, but the point I was going at, what was I going to say then?
I totally interrupt you. Sorry.
No,
yes,
it's okay.
France.
If you picked any of the European nations, to my mind at the moment, they're a little bit more strident, a little bit more smart, and getting on with it rather than just rhetoric. It is the French. Their policy around the incentives for, and I think this is a good way of doing it, listing cars that they believe, electric cars, that because of where they're manufactured, where the raw material comes from, and where they're transported from A to B around the planet, is predicated then on whether they get incentives from the government or not. It's not necessarily a question of they're foreigners, they're not made in France. But going back to a first principle of the whole thing of the thrust towards electrification should be better. Should be reduction of CO2, zero tailpipe emissions, better in other aspects, both for the consumer and then ultimately things like bidirectional charging for the grid and all sorts of things that are even yet to come. And I think the French are just being much more pragmatic about this journey than in Britain here, and certainly the Germans. It feels like the Germans are starting to sort of pull the drawbridge up a bit and hope all of this change kind of goes away a bit. It's getting a bit scary and a bit of a nuisance.
Well, I want to come on to that sort of sense of the inflection point that we're on, that kind of constant debate of, accepting electrification in the global market versus some of these seemingly protectionist policies that are coming into play as well. But before we do, just need to tell you about University Challenge.
Go on then.
So there was the episode on Monday, so 2 days ago. That is the 30th of January. And there was a question: name a European country that is in the EU, and what else? And in the UN, something like that. And both teams answered UK. And the host of the show, Emma Rajan, was like, guys,
Yeah.
it's 2024. Do you remember a little thing called Brexit?
Yeah.
Anyway, it was most entertaining.
And the answer was?
Cyprus and Malta.
Wow.
But
There
I may
you
have
go.
got the question wrong. So, but the answer certainly was
Okay.
Cyprus and Malta.
Yeah.
I digress. So, want to come on to a little bit more about, I think when we talk about Geneva, the fact that there will be a lot of presence from BYD, etc., etc. But before I do, Chris and Julie Ramsey. So, they have gone from the North Pole to the South Pole in a Nissan Ariya. They have done the whole thing, with charging via a portable wind turbine, portable solar.
Yep.
Quite an extraordinary journey. What are you hoping to talk to them about?
Oh, so many things. Of course, electric vehicles, of course, charging, but also the environment, also culture. What's the difference when you go through on a single journey between people in the north and people in the south and all the bits in between? Because, of course, it's very easy to think when you call it pole to pole, that's kind of it. But there's a big bit in the middle. They drove right down through Canada, right down through the United States, through Central America, South America. They met so many different people, so many different cultures. And what I'm interested to find out from them is what were the similarities in people, not the differences. We focus too much, I think, in this world these days, and it gets us into so many difficult situations, horrendous conflicts, to be frank, about talking of our differences rather than saying what are our similarities. And of course, a huge similarity we've all got is the environment, is protecting and trying to maintain some kind of benign environment that doesn't get in the way of producing food, that doesn't get in the way of people being able to have a reasonable, sustainable lifestyle of
Also,
some description.
So that communities can thrive, really. That's what this is about.
Yeah, and over human history, the climate has changed and people have moved. There have been all sorts of movements of people, shifts over time, but they're over millennia. They're over, really long periods of time. But condensing those climatic changes into just a few decades inevitably then impacts massively on people and potentially, and I see many people articulate this with real data and information, this is going to trigger, and already has to some extent, mass migrations of people. And the consequence of that, is we're only seeing possibly the tip of the iceberg. And given Chris and Julie saw a lot of icebergs, I'm sure they can give us a nice flavour on that. So yeah, it's what's the experience in the EV? Of course. How practical and realistic was it, in the way they did it with a support team? How realistic, how real was it? You inevitably have to have some support, but what did that actually look like? But we'll see on stage a lot of visual content. They're going to bring some of their fantastic pictures, put up on a big screen that we've got behind the discussion, some video content. And, you can imagine it, can't you? I mean, they had some hair-raising moments. I mean, this wasn't all like, happy
Sunshine
days.
and rainbows. No.
Oh, no. Sunshine and rainbows, it was not on occasion. I think it was sometimes, oh, my God, the ice is cracking. We're all going to die stuff.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Because they did the ice roads between the North Pole and Canada.
Yes.
That must have been... and because
That in itself is, what?
Yeah, because the other thing, and I remember this was probably the most standout thing from meeting them in Iceland, the tyres are so squishy on their car, such that they can really distribute the weight of the car, not crack the ice, which is already pretty vulnerable. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. And one of the things that also struck me about Julie is that they had done a few years ago the Mongol rally in a Nissan Leaf.
Yeah.
And she said the thing that struck her was that across the world, the kindness of people that sort of far surpasses any differences that may exist politically or, from a geopolitics perspective as well. And I think that side of seeing that universal kindness, but also understanding how anxieties towards the climate are changing across different landscapes, I think that is going to be such a sensational conversation you'll have.
Well, I hope so. It's a question of packing it into, 30 minutes or so. That's always the challenge. But funny enough, some of what you just said there comes out of a book. I like to, maybe because I'm getting older, I listen to books rather than read them. Because when you're moving around, you're on the train, you're in the car, whatever, it's sort of easy to read. So listen. So I'm listening to Be Useful by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Be Useful, 7 Tools for Life. Fascinating. And what he talks about in there a lot is about listening. It's about being a sponge, about having that sense of fascination in what's going on in the world, what's going on around you, and learning stuff. And that's exactly what Chris and Julie have done. They've been on this journey of listening to people and just gone out, trumpeting what they're up to. And I think when it comes down to something we talked earlier about, where are we at the moment with the electric vehicle journey? What's the cadence of adoption? What fits into all of this? We're at a point where I think storytelling is so important now. Credible storytelling, realistic, real world experience from normal people, not necessarily famous people, not necessarily people that whatever. People like Chris and Julie Ramsey.
Yeah.
Because they're not rich. I talked to them the other day. I said, do you mind me asking, how do you pay for all this? And they said, well, it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
We've had to do this and that. This isn't some kind of glamorous Hollywood couple that have just swanned around for a few months and they have made a real commitment, a real sacrifice in trying to help other people. So I have a huge amount of respect for them.
And it's interesting that in this day and age, I think where there's so much information to consume, so much misinformation to consume, actually anecdote really matters. An anecdote from very normal and relatable people. Although I will say, when we filmed them, we did this incredible opening shot and they do look like an extremely glamorous Hollywood couple, even though we know that they're not. So Chris Bangle, I want to ask you very quickly about Chris Bangle. So he is, for those who don't know, he's a pretty controversial designer, ex-BMW, ex-Fiat, ex-Opel. Now, I think this is how you say it, Xiaomi, which is the Chinese cell phone producer who are making electric vehicles. He is best known for the Bangle butt. Did you know this?
No, I didn't. But I'm look, this month I'm doing all my research, all my proper due diligence so that there's no embarrassing moments where I don't know things on stage.
Well,
but
so I'm not sure if he'd appreciate you bringing up the Bangle butt because it wasn't. And I should caveat that's not his own bottom. That is the rear of certain vehicles, most notably the E65 7 Series and the E63 6 Series.
I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so a bit controversial, but very interesting that he's gone to Xiaomi, that he's now, head of design at, there, and that car has been, they've really come out and said that they want it to be ultra, ultra luxury. And interesting that they've gone to, ex-BMW, German OEM, to kind of get that sort of design language, I suppose, into a Chinese car. But yeah, I mean, you're on the start of your homework, so I won't ask you too much about him.
But I think he's got his own studio, his own team, whatever. Yeah. I like people that are not necessarily controversial per se, but innovative. That have a go at changing the thinking of these things. There are a few of those people around. It's great to get Chris on the stage. I am mostly, I think, during that session, going to be listening and watching because he's going to give us a live demonstration of design.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be like a little kind of mini workshop. I know, because sometimes just talking to someone, especially when they are demonstrable in their work, i.e. they can draw pictures and sketches and things, far better to let people see that. So, I'm really looking forward to that.
So, way back when, I used to be at Jaguar Land Rover, and you'd sometimes be in meeting rooms with designers, and everyone else is jotting notes about, 31st of January, Gateway, whatever. And the designers were just in the corner of their page, be sketching these masterpieces.
Yeah, amazing.
And I'd want to be like, could I have that, please? Could you also just sign it, and then I'm going to take that home and put it on my fridge. But moving on, we've kind of alluded to some of this already. The fact is that Geneva has been on a 4-year hiatus. It's coming back since pre-pandemic. It's been around since 1905. It is this pinnacle of motor show. And yet it's not quite as busy this year. BYD are going to be there in a big presence, but there will not be a single German OEM. And it does make me think, what is the role of the motor show in this sort of day and age? And how are you thinking about it?
Well, there's no doubt they've got to change with the times, no doubt. And I think that's why they've got, and I've made a note because I don't want to miss anything, Adrenaline Zone, Mobility Lab, Next World, Classics Gallery, Design District. They've got interactive stuff, touchy-feely stuff, lots of people to talk about things with. So not just the classic traditional car show of lovely displays. There'll be plenty of that.
Yeah.
But it's not as it's always been. And I think that's good. I think when you look in the context of where we are, let's take Germany in particular. So Germany at the moment is in this difficult place. It's experiencing a recession. Politically, there are some issues. I'm not going to get into German politics. Don't know enough about it, but I just know there's a few tricky things going on. And like I said a moment ago about the difference between France and Germany, there does seem to be an evolving mindset in Germany that's a bit different to France's more, eclectic and electric approach, if I can put it like that. So am I disappointed that there are some names missing? Of course I am.
Yeah.
You want to see as many people there as possible. Am I excited about the show and think it's going to be a great place to be? Well, inevitably, because I'm working there, I'm going to say that. But Geneva is a brand. It isn't just a motor show. And I think rising to the challenge of these changes that are going on, and to have invited someone like myself who I'm an electric vehicle advocate, but I am equally pragmatic in this huge challenge the industry has in making this managed transition. How it does it in and around culture, technology, legislation, the rise of Asia, particularly China, what's going on in America with Inflation Reduction Act. Nonetheless, their EV market isn't, how can I put it, as strident as I describe it here in Europe. And then we've got outlying countries like Norway that are absolutely, knocking it out the park.
Yeah.
And a country, again, thinking of recent news items and stuff that's gone on, a country that's, let me think about it for a minute. A Nordic, it's cold. They have severe winters. But so many of the people now, more and more and more, they're getting up to 100% potentially very soon, of purchases are electric. Well, hang on a second. How do all their EVs work then? How do they get from A to B? Because you would be forgiven for thinking with some recent events and news items and the way it's been covered, that having an EV in the winter is like, oh, forget it, hibernate. It's nonsense.
And, I mean, for sure, the range is impacted.
Yes, so it isn't a petrol and diesel car.
Exactly. And that's what you don't see in that overall narrative.
Yeah, it's called physics.
Yeah. But I think what's so interesting is that, many OEMs have come out and said, well, we don't need to spend the money at Geneva because we have these enormous platforms which we can share lots of things on social media and reach our millions of people that way. Totally true. Totally respect that. But I think what you've kind of summarised there is that these motor shows or these events, whether it's the Geneva Motor Show, CES, Fully Charged Live, Everything Electric Live, we have been rebranded. They do represent these sort of flagpoles of let's take stock of where we are.
Yes.
How do we need to participate in this conversation? Where are we headed? And not being there, those people become not part of that conversation, which I think is a real shame, really.
Absolutely. And I know in the rebranding you just mentioned, Everything Electric, this is for me the thing that hasn't been happening well enough, strongly enough, fast enough, etc., is that the two big industries of our time, of the last century, mobility and energy, are, for the first time, radically changing. And bringing those two things together and how they interact with each other and how one works with the other one. That's the stuff that everything electric does. And I mean, when you start to reflect and think on just what batteries can now do at quite big scale, enormous scale in truth, in liberating and enabling the renewable energy revolution, particularly solar, to really, really, really take off. I mentioned earlier, I think we're only at the kind of foothills of some of this stuff, where once you start saying to people, oh, by the way, if you've got solar panels or you haven't, the battery in your electric vehicle now is going to start to do two things.
Yeah.
It isn't just going to take you from A to B, and not everybody, and I imagine lots of people listening, don't drive 200 or 300 miles a day. So the battery in their electric vehicle can do other jobs, either at home, either at work, or maybe in other places. But nonetheless, once that battery is liberated to be part of the energy revolution, either with your home, with the stuff that you use, or the grid, once all of that, I think, manifests itself, we're in a very different place. And by the way, this book, I reread this.
The Great Race.
Well, properly read it, to be honest with you, because I kind of skimmed it before. Great Race, published in 2015. Goes through lots of things about the way the world was there in the electric vehicle revolution at that time.
Which time, sorry?
2015.
2015, sorry.
Yeah. So one of the things it covers is the trauma that was the tsunami and everything that happened in Japan some years ago. And one of the big things that happened at that time was that the government and the utility companies realized that batteries in electric vehicles could be an essential part of grid stability. So in a catastrophic situation where you had, energy dropping out in a modern civilization, which is catastrophic, that's the stuff, it's almost, you can't imagine what that does to an economy. It's cataclysmic. That the batteries could then be bidirectionally charging and help people's homes and the grid. And that, Imogen, is well over a decade ago through the CHAdeMO protocol. So we've lost a decade in some ways in now getting to this, as I say, the foothills of bidirectionality and all that means.
We have actually got an episode on V2G coming out soon. And it is exactly...
I didn't know that. I wasn't trying to trail that for you.
Oh, well, you've teed me up perfectly, so I'm extremely grateful. And I should also mention that the Renault 5 is also V2G enabled, which is extremely exciting.
So's my Buzz, but
yes.
But I can't yet do it because I haven't got a... Anyway, let's not get into all the
it's the ISO 15118-20 or something like that.
This is where you're clever. You can do numbers and letters and join them all up.
Oh, no.
Whatever you say.
But I think what you have also described there is... That is the crux of the inflection point that we're at, in that the world of electric vehicles allow energy security, energy generally, and mobility to come together.
Yep.
And there are tensions there because, the bygone era of the internal combustion engine, of course, yes, oil crisis 1970s, there was a bit of that with regards to energy security, but you still had to import oil on the whole. And so that could exist as this sort of, petrol head kind of world. And now we're in a sphere where we're sort of making these two worlds come together, and there are tensions perhaps.
Yeah. Well, there definitely are tensions. And to be frank, to be totally blunt with you, I'm not as visceral in my narrative about the oil and gas industry as perhaps fully charged, electrified, everything it is, because I actually think that there's much more going on. The fundamental for all civilizations has always been energy, whether it's chopping down wood to make a fire, and cook your food or whatever, or what the modern world is now. And I don't think we should just demonize the fossil fuel industry as an absolute. There are a lot of highly intelligent, extremely passionate, morally focused people in and around that industry that are trying to change things. And curiously, I happened to be talking to one of the inventors of the lithium-ion battery.
Yes, you spoke to
Professor Stan Whittingham.
That's it. Yeah.
So Professor Stan Whittingham is 82 years old.
Yeah.
When he was
he
early,
doesn't look 82.
No, he doesn't. When he started his career in terms of battery development, from being an academic and blah blah blah, commercially, he worked for Exxon.
Yeah.
And I think the story's quite well known. Exxon investigated climate change, dealing with batteries, whatever, and then did some things they should not have done. And that's why people don't like the oil and gas industry. They feel they're liars, cheats, corrupt, all those things. And there is evidence of some of that, fully acknowledge that. But what Stan said, he said I could call him Stan, by the way. No, he did.
Witters.
Yeah. What he said was that we might be surprised. There might be a counterintuitive move. He didn't say for sure, but he felt it could be coming, in that the oil and gas industry becomes some of the principal investors in accelerating this alternative to fossil fuel. It sounds so counterintuitive.
So I read something, and I don't want to get into this too much because I definitely need to do substantially more reading than I've done. But some of the feedback that oil and gas companies have said is that, okay, yeah, sure, we understand that the cost of solar power and wind power is coming down. Cool, great from a capital expenditure point of view. But we don't yet know fully how to make it profitable. And I suppose that's, a big argument there, is that fundamentally this is about how can you make these things make money. And that, their first priority is to shareholders. I don't say that to sort of demonise and be all like, but I think it's an interesting dynamic that people have to kind of, they are thinking shareholder first. And that is the big driver.
Well, there is now money, there is return on investment, there is now focus on renewable energy resources, moving them around the world, even interconnectors between continents, let alone countries. There is extraordinary innovation going on here and huge money being spent on it, because there will be that return on investment. I mean, I mentioned the fellow Lawrence Segaler. He was going to that in absolute detail with him. I'm not allowed to say anymore because he told me, don't tell people this, and this. But
wink, wink.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's happening.
And I think the other thing that I get very excited about is virtual power plants, and actually shifting to this world of the Internet of Energy, where we think about energy that exists in batteries or otherwise, or in any form of storage, in the same way we think about data. And that unlocks so many opportunities to make new sources of revenue and income and all sorts.
Yep.
Okay, so moving on. You mentioned the adrenaline zone at the Geneva Motor Show. And I think that is fascinating, that actually the link between race to road is being made much more explicit. But also interesting that we're having this conversation because you've just launched a little advert.
Well, yes. In fact, a documentary, which I'm, so pleased to share with people, and very much so because you're co-presenting it with me.
Yeah.
Motorsport in the Electric Age, episode 2. We filmed the first one some time ago. Remarkably, it got a review in the Sunday Times online, which was I was bowled over by that. And the purpose of it was to illustrate to people what things are going on in and around engineering, innovation within motorsport. Not just, but okay, we focused a lot on Formula One.
Yeah.
But the people in and around that arena are solving real world problems. I mean, share with the listener what specifically you were talking about when we're in both, well, certainly in Williams and McLaren too.
Yeah, Williams was quite incredible, actually. So they have Williams Advanced Engineering, sits slightly separately from Williams F1. But again, It's that sort of technology transfer hub, I suppose. Their sort of big thing that they're famous for is that they pioneered a way, using same aerodynamic principles, to keep fridges in supermarkets colder, but the aisles warmer.
Yep.
So basically, if you can think about going to the supermarket probably 6 years ago, went down the fridge aisle and it was cold, which indicates that all that, cold air is going into the supermarket rather than keeping the food cold. And they created these blades using principles from Formula One, which make sure that the fridges remain cold.
Correct.
And people remain warm. But the other one that was extremely cool was seeing the absolutely ginormous battery that they've got going in a mining truck in Australia. I think it's called like Christmas Tree Mine or something like that.
And this again is where people perhaps aren't aware of things that are going, like Fortescue Industries, a big Australian mining company buying an innovative British engineering company in and around motorsport to solve real world problems.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a couple of things there, and then were others. So please, for people go, it's free to air, free to watch. It's on my YouTube channel. We filmed it with a great crew and wonderful people. And it was lovely to get Damon Hill to have a chat with us about things. I mean, his his contribution was fantastic because he's well respected, knows what he's talking about. And
I will say on Damon Hill, so I've definitely told you this before, but I said to my dad, I was like, oh, Dad, have you ever heard of Damon Hill? And he was like, what? Obviously, I've heard of Damon Hill. And he's like, the fact that you're asking me that question means you don't even deserve to do this interview. But I think what's interesting is I didn't necessarily agree with some of the things that Damon Hill was saying. And you can really see it in my face. There's a bit of skepticism. I'm doing a bit of a...
But that's fine. Look, if we all work and live in
debate,
an echo,
right?
if we live in an echo chamber, whether it be, everything electric or what I do, whatever, then everyone just says, oh, yes, I agree. And nothing changes.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you want to have confrontation, but what you want is a variety of opinion, and it shakes down into something then that works really well. And there's a word that I think we don't use enough because a lot of people hate it, but I think it's a good word: compromise.
And that was one of the things that came out of the event we were at yesterday that we mentioned at the beginning. A lot of people felt that we were preaching to the converted, and actually the value of that event would have been if more people had been brought into that conversation, open it up, understand what concerns people, and generate better solutions as a consequence, I think.
Yep.
We could continue chatting all day, but I know that we are approaching the end. You've already mentioned the book that you're reading, The Great Race. I wanted to share this one. It is called Climate Capitalism, Winning the Global Race to Zero Emissions. It's written by Akshat Rathi, who is a journalist from Bloomberg, and it's immensely readable. I should say I'm about 33 pages through, but those 33 pages have been exceptional. And he's really sort of looking at, some of the things that we've mentioned today actually take climate solutions and show that they just make a tremendous amount of business.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I shouldn't have done that. And the reason I just put up, I listened to that on Audible.
Did you?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. The one thing about Audible, I find I like it when it's the author reading the story, and it wasn't with that one. It is with the Arnold Schwarzenegger book, by the way, because I've been listening to that. But yeah, so no, that sounds. Have you read it or in the middle?
So
of the...
I'm 33 pages in.
Sorry, you said
yeah. But super readable. Paints the sort of pictures like here's a pragmatic way to look at how these climate solutions just make a tremendous amount of business sense. But I'm not surprised that you've read it. Seems like your exact cup of tea.
Well, talking of cup of tea, someone I've had a cup of tea with, and you should definitely get on the show and have a chat with, is John Elkington, because in a similar theme, he's been around a long time. On a similar theme, he has a book called Green Swans: The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism.
Yes, you have told me about this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Definitely find a way of talking to John because he's got a lovely voice. He's got wonderful wisdom and experience, and he's smart. He's made stuff happen.
Yeah,
he's not just a kind of what do you call it? Yeah, just a sort of academic person that just that stuff. He's kind of made things happen.
I've jotted a note, and John, if you're listening, give us a call. Anything else I should have asked you today? What are you looking forward to in the next couple of weeks?
Well, on a personal note, and this is not going to make me feel very old, I'm going to be a grandparent. My wife and I are going to be grandparents this year for the first time.
Oh, my goodness.
Look, I'm 65. Most of my mates have been grandparents for years. But to make up for lost time, Josh and Gabby are having twins. So...
Oh, my goodness. Due date?
It's end of June, July time. But yeah, so very excited about that on a personal note. And funnily enough, I was listening to a Desert Island Discs and they asked, I think it was Kirsty Walk, asked Keith Richards, what's the point where you stop hell raising and doing all the things you shouldn't do when you're old and whatever? He said, it's when you become a grandparent. So that's me finished with rock and roll and everything. I can't go to nightclubs anymore. I can't go giving it large. I've got to be a grandparent.
So obviously I'm not a grandparent because I am 30, but I do have many, many nieces and nephews, and it is just so glorious. And actually, we had a shoot a couple of weeks ago at the Natural History Museum looking at ocean mining. That's coming out in a few weeks. But the day before, I was like, right, I need to do a recce of this filming location. So I took my nephew, who's called Dylan, he's 3. We went to see the volcano exhibition, went to see the dinosaurs. And seeing the Natural History Museum in London through his eyes was magic. Total magic.
Well, that's something to look forward to then. I'll do likewise.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, look, thanks for inviting me. Nice to be in the kitchen. We haven't touched the biscuits, but
I know.
be assured when this finishes, I'm taking some of those home.
I'll give you a Tupperware box.
Thanks.
Like everything electric, you'll love our fun-packed Everything Electric expos around the world. Next up, we're in London. Remember, energy and transport professionals go for free on the first day.
That is sadly all we have time for today. As we mentioned in the podcast, we will be going to the Geneva Motor Show to see the Renault 5 and also the Dacia Spring. So any questions you want answered on either of those, please do put them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you so much to Roger for joining us today. And before you go, I have one super quick request. If you could give this a like, a comment, a share, or a subscribe, or all of the above, it is immensely appreciated. It helps to ensure that others can find this podcast and we can continue to share the stuff that we think's important and interesting and fun in this clean energy transition. So that's all we've got time for. If you have been, thank you so much for listening.